Consider the center of this time-lapse. As the ancient forest rapidly withers to ash, a single elven silhouette stands entirely untouched. This captures the fundamental tragedy of the elves, immortal beings trapped on a mortal continent, where everything around them is biologically programmed to die. Witnessing endless cycles of birth and decay over thousands of years produces a compounding psychological weariness. It leaves the elves longing for the unchanging, perfect realm of Valinor across the sea. This weariness effectively halted elven cultural progression. Because they could not face a future defined by decay, they stopped founding new realms and focused their entire civilization on a single objective: finding a way to lock their fading magic into the present. The elves' refusal to accept the natural law of change became their greatest strategic vulnerability. Sauron did not need to defeat them with a physical army if he could offer them a way to ignore the passage of time. In the Second Age, the master-smith Celebrimbor attempted to solve this crisis. He forged 3 rings of power in secret, designing them strictly to heal and preserve elven domains rather than to wage war. Because Sauron never physically touched these Gree-specific rings during their creation, they remained free from his direct malicious corruption. However, if we examine the underlying architecture of these artifacts, a systemic flaw appears. Sauron taught Celebrimbor the craft of ring-making. As a result, the 3 elven rings are connected by invisible threads to the Dark One ring. The elves unwittingly tethered their survival to its creator, making him the silent anchor of their civilization. We can see this technology in action through Nenya, the Ring of Water, held by Lady Galadriel. Nenya functions as an environmental anchor. It generates a localized stasis field that conceals a region from external observation while stopping its natural ecological decay. This visualization of Lothlorien shows the effect. Galadriel used Nenya to keep the golden Malorn trees alive for centuries, their leaves suspended midair and radiating a faint starlight that hasn't changed in an age. Maintaining this unnatural preservation took a severe physical toll. Pushing back against the rot of the outside world amplified Galadriel's personal exhaustion and her longing to abandon Middle-earth for the sea. Nenya's preservation was a beautiful illusion. It maintained a bubble of immortality, but required constant, agonizing magical exertion to keep the natural world away. The mightiest of the 3 was Vilya, the Ring of Air, which was ultimately wielded by Elrond. While Nenya froze ecology, Vilya was used to preserve wisdom and cultural memory. It locked the learning and history of the ancient First Age into place, preventing it from being forgotten. Elrond utilized Vilya to construct Rivendell. Amidst a continent defined by constant war, Rivendell operated as a sanctuary of peace, where the past was perfectly maintained. Vilya provided absolute defensive cover. Rivendell could not be breached by brute military force. Taking the valley would have required Sauron himself to march upon it. By utilizing Vilya, Elrond effectively built a living museum. He isolated his people from the natural progression of history in an attempt to keep the ancient past alive indefinitely. The 3rd ring, Narya, followed a different path. It was given by the elf lord Círdan to the wizard Gandalf. While the other rings focused on the landscape, Narya targeted the internal spirit of the inhabitants. It was designed to address the mind directly. As the passage of time and Sauron's shadow inflicted psychological despair on the populations of Middle-earth, Narya's mechanism was used to combat that specific exhaustion. Consider how this visualization captures the dynamic. Gandalf wielded Narya in secret, using its warm, ember-like glow to push back suffocating waves of black fog, reinforcing the willpower of men facing absolute defeat. While Nenya and Vilya were used to hide from the world to preserve the past, Narya was the only elven ring used to actively preserve the spirit needed to fight for the future. The timeline reaches its climax when the One Ring is finally cast into the fires of Mount Doom, eradicating Sauron's power. Returning to our system diagram, we see the fatal trigger. Because the 3 rings were built on the foundational craft of the One Ring, destroying the Master Ring shatters the entire network. The threads connecting them instantly snap. the localized stasis fields across Middle-earth suddenly break. The magic powering the elven rings shuts down, dissolving into gray dust. The physical consequences are immediate. The golden leaves of Lothlorien wither. Without the rings to hold back time, these hidden sanctuaries age and decay at a normal, mortal pace. To achieve absolute victory over evil, the elves had to intentionally trigger the mechanism that destroyed their own magical existence. With their tools of preservation destroyed, thousands of years of accumulated weariness catch up to the elven population, making life in Middle-earth unendurable. This forces a final exodus. The ring-bearers board white ships at the Grey Havens, taking the now powerless rings with them, and leaving the rocky shores of Middle-earth behind. The era of magic was always finite. The rings merely delayed the inevitable. By finally relinquishing their desire to freeze time, the elves gracefully yielded the world to the dominion of men.